the end of the morning, we were saying that all this thought and this whole system is even more social and cultural than it is individual, and it's necessary to go into that in order to see the whole of it and to see the essential features of it. So and the way we're proposing is by dialogue. You see that the word dialogue I've explained as the root dialogos in Greek. It means dia means through, and logos the word or the meaning. And we may picture meaning flowing between people. Dia doesn't mean to, but through, so many people can participate. And it's between us, you see. So instead of, it's like saying, if you have two people, you may say that there are 2 points connected by a dotted line showing their relationship, or the other view is a dotted line ending in 2 points, right? And not a solid line ending in 2 points, right? Saying the relationship is the main thing and the people are at the end, are the extremes of it. So in the dialogue we might perhaps be that way, you see. Now that this separation, which is due to thought, that just as thought separates the self into the subject and object, the observer and the observed, which is all one, this process, so it separates people. But when they're really in communication, in some sense, a oneness arises between people as much as inside the person, right? So therefore therefore dialogue, of course dialogue has not been used in that sense commonly. People talk about dialogues in the UN or dialogues, some of the things they say we negotiate, but that's only the beginning, you see, to try to, if people don't even know how to get started and they have got to trade off various points so that they can find out how to get started at least, or to proceed. But if you merely trade off various points and negotiate, then that doesn't get very far. So the dialogue, in the view I'm suggesting, goes very much further than that. Now, there was, I remind you that, I read many years ago of an anthropologist who visited a North American Indian tribe, probably hunter-gatherers. They would meet in a circle of about 30 people or 40, I don't know, and they would talk directly with each other, and apparently there was no particular authority. It may be that the older people were listened to because they were supposed to be wiser, and then they talked, and they had no agenda, no purpose. They made no decisions, and they ended for no apparent reason. But it seemed that that was their way of life, and after that they knew, in a sort of sustained way, again and again. And after that they knew what to do, you see. They understood each other well enough so that when they got together they could know what to do. Now, it seemed to me at that time this would be the right way to live, but we don't seem to be able to do so in modern civilization, or even in older ones, that people seem to require an authority, a hierarchy, or else and they make determinate decisions and so on, which are not really ever carried out. They don't quite understand each other when they're talking. They never really can maintain this sort of thing. Right? Now, it's becoming more and more urgent that people should be able to talk together because of this technology and making it dangerous if we can't, I see. Now, the point now is, what does it mean to be able to really communicate, you see? See, if people try to talk together, suppose we put from our society 20, if we put about 4 or 5 people together, then you have a different situation when you put 20 or 30 together, right? 4 or 5 people can sort of get to know each other and adjust, and they can sort of avoid all the difficult questions and so on, and they can remain somewhat friendly, though they're in some way they may be reproducing a more family type situation. Or you see, so somebody there may take on the authority or something if they want to do something. But now, when you have 30 or 40, or 20, even 20, a new thing comes in. There are many different more different points of view, and you get something more like what a cultural situation, right, of a society, where, you see, now in society we have a culture. I say a culture is basically a shared meaning, but also it has the same root as cultivate. We sort of cultivate it in some way. And the point is that without that shared meaning, the society will fall apart. Right? It's a kind of cement that holds it together. If people want to do anything, they must understand. The things must mean the same to them, or they can't do it. And there's a bit cross purposes if everything has a different meaning for different people. And however, in our society, there's many subcultures in which things mean something very different. Right? Ethnic subcultures, religious subcultures, economic subcultures, people in different groups, or educated professions, thousands of different divisions. Huh? And they now, if people from all those groups try, or even within one of those groups tries to get together, generally what happens is, well, if they have somebody who runs the thing, then all right, they just can do it, right? But if they were given a leaderless, agendaless group, right, they probably would feel very anxious and not know what to do, right? Even if they went through that anxiety, they would find sooner or later that they all had different views and opinions, and they were not communicating, and each one was doing things which was irritating the others, right? Is that clear what I mean? We're making the others angry, That each one would have a way of thinking which would make the other feel very uncomfortable or angry. And they would start blaming each other for all these things and so on, as I've seen happen. And and you see that the whole thing could degenerate into, they'd just fall apart, right? Because they'd say, what's the use? So now that sort of difficulty arises, in fact, whenever people try to get together, whether for common purpose, whether in the government or in business or wherever, you find that's the kind of thing that's going on. That if you see how bills are done in Congress, they really don't get together. They just trade off certain points, but they don't really come to a common meaning, right? Probably when the Constitution of the United States was written, they spent 3 or 4 years, I understand, hammering it out. They're staying in the same place. I don't know how long they stayed in the same building, but I was told they spent a very long time there in the same place, and they sort of hammered it all out so that they would all agree on the Constitution, which was a relatively unified document, though it had certain problems in it which were not unified, such as those which led to the Civil War and so on. So so anyway, that's by way of introduction, that just for practical purposes we would need this, but in addition it has a much deeper significance. Right? So if we went through this, you would find people, first of all, some people would become dominant, you see. They talk easily. They would run the show. Others would be keeping quiet because they're afraid of making fools of themselves, perhaps. But they would feel somewhat resentful of those who were dominant. Right? That would also split the group, right? There would be all sorts of some people would be acting out roles, and other people would find this very irritating, right? And so on. You see, all sorts of things would be happening. But suppose we got through all of that, then we would find more difficult things. These are all problems, you see, which will arise when a group tries to get together, but they're still on the surface, right? Now then come more difficult things, which are people have different basic assumptions about the important things in life, assumptions as to what's really necessary, for example, and what's really true, and so on. And what the way people ought to be, and what our real purpose ought to be, and so on. And these assumptions are rather, we've seen they're in the form of reflexes, right? People don't quite know they've got them, but when they're challenged, suddenly a person jumps up with an emotional charge, right? And then it goes back and forth, you see. The whole group may polarize, again, between two such assumptions. For example, I've given this before, that when we're trying to hold dialogue in the early period in Israel, and somebody said very quietly and innocently that the trouble between Jews and Arabs is that Zionism, the main trouble, Zionism keeps them apart, you see. Then suddenly somebody else got up with his eyes popping out. And he's saying without Zionism the state would fall to pieces. So there were two different assumptions, you see. Right? I mean, both are correct in a way. But there was no way to bring them together, you see. Now, those assumptions generate tremendous power. They're really assumptions of necessity, right? One assumption was that it was really necessary to drop this idea of Zionism, and the other was without it, it's impossible, you see. So, and you see then, what can happen in such cases is that perhaps a lot of people were then drawn in who weren't drawn in. The thing got very heated, full of this electrochemical smog, and people who hadn't been worried about it before were all drawn in. But a few perhaps were able to deflect it a bit, so it didn't go too far, and it didn't get resolved because a dialogue would have to be sustained a long time to resolve a thing like that. But it did reach the point where at least the people could talk to each other, and the fellow didn't walk out, and so on, and they were able to listen to some extent to these two opposing assumptions or opinions, right? You see, now, this may seem a small point, but it's really crucial. Right? You see that if the world is full of different assumptions of that kind, assumptions between capitalism and communism, which divided the world until recently, and assumptions, each country has assumptions of its sovereignty, and the other one has another contrary assumption of it, that it's right and it's sovereign, and so on, you see, and all the way through, who's the boss, the assumption, I'm the one who runs it, if it's somebody else wants to run it, and so on, I would be better able to do it, and so on, you see, so there are so many assumptions, right, and they're very powerful. They're assumptions of necessity. Now, different cultures will say all the literature in the culture contains those assumptions of necessity. The dramas, they're in there implicitly, right? You see, the Greek dramas, were full of those assumptions of necessity, which created the tragedies. And the hero, who was really a very fine person, was very consistently stuck to his assumptions of necessity and destroyed himself, right? Everybody around him. So the point is, and this is all collective, you see, it's not just an individual thing. There are whole groups that stick together because of this, right? And we pick them up from the culture, you see. The culture contains all these meanings of what is necessary. And therefore we have all that, right? Now, and in any group of people, including this one, if we were to stick at it per day after, say let's say it would be right to meet once a week for indefinitely, not forever, but indefinitely. Now then, sooner, in the beginning it would be polite, you would find various topics you could agree about to talk on. Like there was one group where there were some liberals, left-wingers, and the other side were a lot of conservatives, and they found a lot of things to talk about which had nothing to do with that. And then gradually they ran out of those things, and somehow it began to have to talk about these things, right? And then it wasn't so easy, right? So the point is that sooner or later, in this group or in any group, this sort of problem would arise. Now, if we can't face this, then we can't work together. You see, suppose you have to work together. The typical problem, which we've been thinking about, some of us recently, is the directors of companies or the executive officers. They have got to work together in a group and also with the rest of the company, and everybody's got a different assumption, which is a kind of a reflex. He doesn't know it, right? They may be implicitly following different policies, so they're going off in different directions, although they're supposed to be working together, you see. They're really resisting each other. Right? So the same is true in the government, clearly. The government is clearly full of just people resisting each other, right? They're really canceling each other's efforts, right? Now confusing the whole thing. So and in every organization you will find that, you see. Even if you set up a fellow on top, the chief, you see, the others have their own opinions, and they won't necessarily follow the directives from on top. They will seem to follow them, but there's a resistance underneath. They're not following them, and he can't get his policies carried out, right? So we need to talk. Now, what can we do with this, you see? So we're saying that there is a way. It's really the same problem with the individual. You see, the individual has contrary intentions, right, inside of him, contrary reflexes. We've said, suppose he's got them. He's angry, and he wants not to be angry. You see, he says, being angry is terrible, it's going to destroy what I'm doing, but I'm still angry. So on one hand, I have the intention to remain angry, on the other hand, I have the intention to stop. Right? Now, it happens that the two intentions may be in different people or in the same person, but it works. When you set up a group, it works much the same. In the group, it's the same, right? You see, so we have the same point that in the individual, we said, you stay with this conflict, right? You see, we don't escape it, we stay with it, we bring it out even, right? And we begin to get some insight. We begin to see how the thought is producing the conflict, right? And you see, as an individual, you would have to see that doing this is more important than the particular issue which you are trying to resolve. Right? If you can do this, you have gone to a deeper level beyond the issues that are disturbing you. Right? So the same is true in the group. You see that if we can stay with this conflict of intentions and of reflexes and of assumptions, because every assumption is implicitly a reflex and a set of intentions and a set of... It just as it happens, it moves out into the group, right? And also each person is affected by the thought of the others, so that each person, the reflexes of one person become the reflexes of the other. See, if one person is angry, the other is angry, right? If one person is whatever, it all spreads.
We have to find in a group a broader, common assumption of necessity, that or a deeper one. Is that? Well, when you say that about the individual, I could see where if I find a necessity or have an intention to understand the process, that may be stronger than moving away from my anger.
Well, if you see it sufficiently, yes. But you see it. But to see this, though, you must see the meaning of what's going on. You see the deeper meaning. Right? In other words, you won't see this just given the conditioning we've got in society. Right? Not likely.
Right.
But we go into it and we see the deeper meaning of this whole situation. You see, what I'm trying to say now is the dialogue proceeds not from imposing a purpose or an intention. You see, if we just said, let's all decide to do this, namely, whatever you say, this would be an imposition, you see. It would really be more conflict.
So people would have to come already given that intention.
Well, no, maybe it can develop, you see, as we communicate. See, the point I'm saying is that we won't start with the dialogue right away, as we're not starting right now. We start by talking about dialogue, right? We're not pretending we're having a dialogue, but we're talking, just as we're talking about all these other things, we start talking about dialogue. We're seeing the meaning, as we saw the meaning of the whole thought process and how it's going wrong, we also see the meaning of this situation collectively. Now, you see, let's look at this question of meaning, because, see, the word meaning has three meanings in the dictionary. One of them is significance. You know what that is, it points to something. There's value, and there's purpose, right, or intention. Now, something which has a great deal of these are connected, because if you say it means a lot to me, it means it has a high value, and if you say I mean to do it, it's the same as to say it's my purpose, right, my intention. So they're related words, obviously, and something with great significance will generate a sense of value, and the value is the energy that infuses you and makes you feel it's worth doing, right? Or worth.
Yeah, but see, like when you're talking here, you are consciously or unconsciously creating a significance.
That's the point. I'm trying to say that I'm communicating a significance.
Okay. Now, but if I were to get together with a bunch of people, that significance just may not be available or able to articulate to each other.
Well, I think that it would. I'm trying to say let's start by communicating this significance and seeing where we can go, right? You see that? If people who had no notion of dialogue got together, no notion of this whole process of thought and dialogue got together, then possibly they might find a way and they might not, but the chances are they would not get there. Now, they might nevertheless somehow by a creative step get there and do it.
It seems that there's another possibility also, though, and that is that if they are sufficiently open, they may see a common necessity.
That may be, but I'm saying that the typical people in our society have reflexes which are against that openness, right?
Right, okay. I'm just saying that we may not have to create or project any significance. I'm just wondering if we maybe have a common necessity.
Well,
a possibility we can discover in this.
Yeah, but
process.
you can't see necessity without the significance. See, this necessity is a significance. You see, the situation signifies necessity. It signifies it cannot be otherwise, right?
I guess I'm not quite clear.
Well, look, how do you know that something is necessary?
I don't know, I would say through perception or awareness of it.
Yes, but that's a significance. You see the meaning of the situation, which implies that something is necessary. You see, and how do you know what is necessary? You see, look at a situation. I perceive X as necessary, right? But that's a certain significance. See, necessity and contingency are two significances, right?
But doesn't the perception then give it the significance? Once you have that perception?
Yes,
that's
it
the
will.
first thing that happens?
But if everybody were perceiving clearly, we wouldn't have this problem, you see.
No, right. Obviously we're not, but I'm just saying that maybe that there's a possibility that we can see this common need.
At some point we may see a common necessity, right? A common meaning, right? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm just outlining the idea of meaning now and saying at some point we may all see a common meaning, right? Which includes what is necessary, what is valuable, what is worthwhile, and also what the purpose is, what the intentions are that could realize that. Now you see, the purpose flows out, the value flows out of the perception of the meaning, right? And also the purpose. Now the purpose may be changing because as you see the meaning more deeply, you may have to shift the purpose, right? Is that clear? You see that I want to show that we have got to start by seeing the meaning, or the significance in this case. Now, if we all saw the significance right away, perhaps these early people saw the significance right away and no argument, no discussion was needed. They just got there and did it, right? But now we have gone through X thousand years of civilization with its smog and whatnot, and it's very hard possibly to see the meaning of this. Even if we see it by inference, right? It still is not working in the reflexes. In other words, people who see that we've got to get together still can't do it. Because the reflex comes up like Zionism, anti-Zionism.
I think maybe that for me the word necessity has the same meaning as meaning.
It's a kind of meaning, but there's more meaning. There are all kinds of meanings besides necessity, right? I mean, you see, there's the general and the particular, and there's necessity and contingency, and there's a lot of other things like that. You see, there are many meanings, and necessity is a particular kind of meaning, which you see.
But I'm just wondering, isn't that fundamental to dialogue, though?
What? Yes.
The necessity of, isn't there a necessity?
That's right. There is a necessity. We can see, if we all see the necessity of dialogue, we will just be doing it, right? But I'm starting from a situation where that is not a common perception, right?
So would you say that the necessity arises out of the meaning? If you don't understand what it means, you can't understand that it's necessary.
See, that's what I'm questioning, because I think that the necessity already is there. I think we have this necessity in the way that the world is.
But most people don't see
We
it.
don't see that, right? They don't see the meaning of that, but I think it's a
Well, that's
fact.
what you just said. They don't see the meaning.
Okay, right, but they don't see the fact.
No, but that's what the meaning is. What they don't see. You see that the meaning is necessary to see the fact, right? You see that you don't see the fact clearly unless you see a coherent meaning, right? You see that what things mean to you is will determine the way you act, right? If something means an enemy, you act one way. You know, whatever. That's what we were saying. That our perception goes into our thinking goes into the object and gives it a different meaning, right? Into the perception. Is that clear? You know, so a great deal of thought has gone into perception, giving it a different meaning. And that meaning which our thought gives it is that no dialogue is necessary. We can all go on as individuals doing whatever we like. That's what everybody's saying. In fact, people like Reagan have said that that's the highest, and Margaret Thatcher prides herself on that, that is the highest form of civilization. Right?
Okay, so
What? Every individual doing something just for himself.
right.
And not consulting anybody else, you think?
Is a statement that we have a given number of facts, which is various things are happening in the world. For one person, that means that we should go hide in the hills and collect ammunition. For another person, it means we should get together and talk.
Yeah.
And for another person,
It means forget about it all and just take care of yourself.
right. So many different meanings could come out of that.
Yeah. You see, because of all those different thoughts, it may be that if we really saw it clearly, we would see together that we really need dialogue. But there's vast numbers of thoughts have come in, and they enter into the perception of the meaning. And all sorts of people are seeing the meaning differently, and that's why we can't get together. Right?
Are you suggesting that, how would you suggest that people got together? For what reason would they get together if not for the purpose that we've come here? How would you get people together in the first place?
Well, then people are together to a certain extent because they want to do various things, you see. And in addition, they might get together for this reason, but people are trying to get together for countless reasons and not succeeding. For example, there are the people who are interested in the ecological crisis. Now, they all have different meanings as to what should be done, and they can fight each other and cancel each other's efforts out, right? So, therefore, they are trying to get together, and not seeing the point of what's going on, not seeing how thought works, they are not able to.
You're suggesting that those people could get together for a particular ecological reason.
But then they would either they would discover, it should be said, or somehow they would learn that they cannot do this unless they go into this other question.
So that's a possibility you're suggesting might occur.
Yeah.
Is occurring.
Yes. You see, at present, there's a danger that the whole thing will split up. Right? In fact, it has split up a lot. And the same as everything else has split up, right? Because everybody's got a different meaning.
So isn't that one step removed from the fact then? That we've already taken it and given it a particular meaning?
What?
Well, whatever the meaning is, isn't how we perceive reality, the world situation or whatever, we give that a meaning. Hasn't that moved into a personal or subjective direction away from the fact?
It has moved, but I'm saying, but the fact is that it has moved. We must start with this fact, right? You see, the higher order fact is that that people are not looking at the true fact, right? That's where we have to start, from that fact.
But as you're saying, circumstances are beginning to compel us to do that in new ways.
Yes. Well, they're making it necessary to do it, but whether we will do it or not remains to be seen, right?
Is it important or even necessary to have any reason for a group of people coming together to attempt to have this dialogue, or simply the fact of the people being together and attempting to do it, do you move from there?
Well, if people just got together, 30 people, I don't know what would happen. They wouldn't do it. You see, if 30 arbitrarily chosen people, right? You see, I'm trying to say that we have got to see the meaning of dialogue, the significance and the value of dialogue, if we're going to sustain the work needed to make it work, right? it won't work just in 5 minutes. It has to. You have to sustain the dialogue week after week because there are all these resistances that are going to come up. So people will have to have a firm perception of the meaning of dialogue, of the meaning of the whole situation.
Okay, now that sounds stupid, but what is this meaning? See, in many of these groups that we've done, every once in a while I say, well, why are we here? And nobody ever knows.
Well, we're trying to say, in some sense, maybe there would be we can try to put the meaning as if you have an insight into it, you could put it in words, but people have some vague sense of it, right? And which is not yet formulated, and that's one of the difficulties that we've got to get through, right? And we need a creative step so that we really see this firmly. You see, you could ask, why don't people see this clearly? You know, it seems a very present danger, and yet it seems people can't see it, right? Now, it's because of this thought process, which is collective as well as individual, that it's causing us, it's entering perception, the whole, the thoughts, the fantasies, the collective fantasies, right? Myths are collective fantasies, and you see every culture has its myths, right? And many of them are entering perception as if they were perceived realities, huh? And everybody has a somewhat different way in which this happens, and we don't actually see the fact, right? And that is the fact, that we don't see the fact. You see, that there's a higher order of fact, which is that we're not seeing the direct fact. Right? Now that's the fact we must start from.
If we were to begin to deconstruct our culture, wouldn't we also be able to do that individually as we go along? Because they're one and the same.
Yeah, well, they're both together in the same. It's the same field. You see, it's the field of the system of thought, right? So the culture is held together by that system of thought, which has got the same flaw in whether it's collective or individual.
Right. So how do we begin to deconstruct?
Yeah, well, I'm discussing, that the dialogue will do it. You see, we're sort of trying to get into it, right? Now, the point now is that if we firmly, suppose we say, at least we see the meaning of the situation, that it makes dialogue necessary, it makes something necessary, right? Makes it necessary, and also we see the value of it, it's very important, and we see that we begin to generate some sort of purpose, at least some immediate purpose of what shall we do, right? That purpose may change because as we move along we may want to do something else again and again, right? Now we can't start from the purpose is what I'm trying to say. Because that purpose anyway can't be fixed, right? But rather we have to start from seeing the meaning, and the perception of the meaning can get deeper and deeper too, right? So we're saying if we all see the meaning, I say why would we stick together having all these contrary assumptions and reflexes and going through all that unpleasantness and frustration, right? Why would we want to stick together? See, if there's something important, we know you will do that, right? So if you say if you see this is important, then we would stick together and say let's sustain this dialogue anyway, right? Now let's see if we find creatively how to get through this.
In so many words, you just said, if we see the necessity of it.
Yeah, and we see the necessity, but that's what it means to us. The situation means to us that it is a necessity, right? To somebody else it may mean, as you said, it's no necessity at all, I can just take care of myself. You see? Now, I'm proposing that that's because of a certain way of thought. That can we have an insight, if we wish to say, into the necessity, which really removes this smog, which every time people try to get hold of it, they get lost in the smog, right?
The necessity of
really communicating freely. But these assumptions, for example, are stopping us communicating. They give this emotional charge, we defend them against evidence that they're wrong, and so on, right?
the necessity of seeing that.
The necessity of seeing all of that, including the whole neurophysiological chemical process that's involved, that binds us.
So then an ordinary group might not have that necessity.
They wouldn't even know about this, you see. How could they see that necessity if they don't know about this at all, right?
And are you suggesting that it might work with an ordinary group, or it couldn't work?
Well, it's not likely. You see, possibly if they were very creative and they stuck with it, they might find it anyway, right? I mean, we don't want to put limits on the human possibilities, but I'm saying it doesn't look likely.
More and more, though, the scientists of group process are coming to see and bring out for people that the biggest obstacle to a group achieving whatever it was formed to do is that it can't share meaning. Is that there is an inability to share meaning in the constitution or the co-presence of a number of people, and that the first order of business for a group to be able to do whatever it's going to do is to learn how to share meaning together.
Yes, and that means dialogue. You see, that's what I say.
Right, that implicates the dialogue.
Yeah, and so the point is, when we say we see the necessity of sharing meaning, and the first thing we discover is we can't do it, right? That's the same thing has happened with the individual. We see the necessity of staying with anger, and we can't do it. We're moving away, right? So then the idea is we now have to watch how we move away, right? So when we say, if you're really serious about it, and saying, I really see the necessity, then I won't just stop because I failed at that point, right? But I say, well, let's stick with it and see if I can't find why it's not working, right?
Want to engage in dialogue as an exercise domain to play with this.
Yes, you could play with it, but then you will get this frustration because very serious assumptions will come up, which are very, very powerful. And you have to say that it gets difficult and unpleasant and so on, and we'll stick with it. You see, now, then we can't guarantee it's going to work, but even if you wanted to do anything else, it was difficult, you could not guarantee it's going to work, right? If you asked for a guarantee beforehand, you might never do it, right? So
we don't even know in a way what working means. We may think it's supposed to work this way, and it may be working, but on a level we have no idea.
Well, we don't know too well what it means, yes. Now, but then suppose we stick with it. Now let me just say, paint a sort of give what I call a vision of dialogue to sort of give an idea of what it might mean, right? Then, though you don't have to accept it, but it's something saying, let's look at that. And saying this vision will not work, you see, I'm right, not right away anyway. That when you first try it, it won't work, but still it's an important vision, right? Almost anything worthwhile when you first try it doesn't work. Now the point is, I'm saying, suppose we can stick with this, and we face this emotional charge, this, all this smog, all this irritation, all this frustration. Really, it can develop into hate if very powerful assumptions are there, right? Like between the Zionist and the anti-Zionist could easily do that, or between, that's rather mild compared with what's really possible with some assumption. And suppose you say, well, that hate is again a neurophysiological chemical disturbance, right? Of a very powerful kind. Which is endemic in the world. It's all over the world now. I mean, wherever you look, you see people hating each other, right? So now, suppose you stick with that. Now, you may get an insight, but a shared insight. Right? That we're all in the same position. You see, everybody has got an assumption. Everybody is sticking to his assumption. Everybody is disturbed neurochemically. The fundamental level is the same, right? These differences are not so important, right? You see, so that I presented it as an inference, but if you actually say got an insight at that moment, it might touch that whole reflex structure with all the chemistry. It might be touched together. You see, you could see there's a kind of level of contact which in the group, which, remember, it's all anyway that the thought process an extension of the body process, and all the body language is showing it and so on. People are really in a rather close contact. You see, hate is an extremely close bond, right? I remember somebody was saying that when people are really in a close contact with talking about something which is very important to them. Their whole bodies are involved, their hearts, their adrenaline, all the neurochemicals, everything. They're far closer contact with each other than with some parts of their body, such as the toes, right? So in some sense, there is established in that contact one body, right? And also, if we see that, if we can all listen to all the opinions and suspend them, right, without judging them, your opinion on the same base as anybody else's, then we all have one mind because we have the same content, right? All the opinions, all the assumptions. You see, so the difference is then secondary. You see, so at that moment, and the point then is yes, that you have in some sense one body, one mind. It does not overwhelm the individual. If the individual has another assumption, he can have it. It's shared with the group, and the group takes it up. So there's no conflict. In fact, the individual does not agree. It is not important whether you agree or not, right? So there is no pressure to agree or disagree.
Wait, I gotta get that again.
Right.
Are you saying the contact is in here, but the mental constructs that people have the thoughts that people have might be quite different? There doesn't need to be an agreement there.
We don't have to agree that they're right, but we have to listen to every thought and see its meaning.
Right, and then the connection is molecular. It's not in thought.
It's a sort of molecular. It's hard to describe. I mean, it's at another level, right? And therefore, I think that people want that very much. And in early times, they had it quite frequently. And in England, there were these football crowds. You see, the people there preferred not to have seats in their football stands, but to stand and just bunched against each other. And they got so when they get so many people and something happens, then people push against each other, and many people get killed, right? Because of the crowd. They can't control it anymore, and the pressure builds up to something where nobody can breathe, and so on. And there was a recent incident in Liverpool, I think, or wherever it was, where a lot of people were killed, and there are other incidents have been of that nature. And so they began to say, why not put seats in all these stadiums, football stands, you see? And many people objected, said, but we don't want seats, we want that contact. You see, the reason they're going to these football games is not just to see the game, right? The game is a socially acceptable reason for having this contact, which the society doesn't allow anywhere else, right?
My understanding that if I can look beyond the assumptions and let it be, no matter what, to show respect that you have your own assumptions, I have mine, go beyond that, and then I can see me in you.
We can see we all have these assumptions, and we look at all the assumptions. I'm looking at your assumptions and my assumptions. They're all suspended, right? I'm not deciding they're right or wrong. Or if I think I prefer mine, well, that's okay, but still I'm looking at the meaning of what you say. And now we're sharing a common meaning, therefore. Now, if somebody else comes up with another assumption, we all listen to that. We share that meaning, right? Now, that would be the vision of dialogue, right? The point then is that we would establish this kind of bond at another level, which is called fellowship, impersonal fellowship. You don't have to know each other. In these football crowds, nobody knows each other, very few. But they still feel something that's missing when they do, in personal relations. You see, so the point is, and in war, for example, many people feel there's a kind of comradeship which they miss in peacetime, right? It's the same sort of thing, right? That close connection, which they, you see, so that fellowship, that mutual participation. And the point is that I think people miss that in our society. You see, our society glorifies the separate individual, right? The communists were trying to establish something else, but they completely failed in a very miserable way. But nevertheless, and they have adopted the same values as we've got now, you see. But the point is that people are not entirely happy with that, that they feel isolated, right? Even those who succeed feel isolated, right? You know, that there's another side they're missing.
Dr. Bohm, I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse in a way. We're presently talking about dialogue, which is what we've been doing here, but don't we have the task at hand that when we return to our respective corners, so to speak, we want to draw people to dialogue with?
Well, you see, I think that we shouldn't think of a task. You see, the whole point of dialogue is we are not going to have an agenda or meaning or purpose. We are going to see the meaning and act accordingly, right?
But isn't there still the fact of 30 people or whatever number coming together under one roof, as we've done here? I mean, isn't there's still something that must make that happen?
Well, but we can't make it happen, you see, not force it to happen anyway. You see, I'm trying to say we can only look, as we did with the individual, we can only perceive the situation and have our insight may change the barriers to this, right?
Okay, so obviously there's no prescription which would perhaps be a contradiction to what we're talking about.
No.
But yet there is something unknown that must be done, that can or cannot be done for that to happen.
Yes, well, something must happen, you see, and we don't know whether it will or not. Right?
Yes.
Now, see, I think what I'm trying to say is present this meaning of dialogue, the vision of dialogue, which will, by seeing the meaning, we will then begin to feel the value of it and begin to establish purposes which may help us, bring us toward it, right?
The more the meaning, the more the action.
From the meaning flows the value, the sense of value, and from that flows the purpose and the action, right?
So we're kind of talking about a shift in emphasis of priorities and importance. If we could see the importance of, put the importance of communication and staying with the fact above our own assumptions, and see if we can kind of bring that idea into many situations.
Yes, well, it will come. If we once see the importance, it will come, right? You see, the point is, you always have to ask, if you've seen the importance, why aren't we doing it? You see, the answer is always there are further chemistry and further reflexes we haven't touched, right?
But it's something we could
work on.
at.
Yeah. In other words, that by sustaining this dialogue, we're beginning to probe into all that deeper chemistry, which was hidden now. And it remains a part of the whole process of these reflexes to hide themselves, so as to avoid disturbing the apple cart and so on. And the suggestion is that that this vision of dialogue, if we try to realize it, we find we can't do it. Now, but every vision has that character at first, you see. And the point is, you have to sustain the dialogue in spite of frustration and all that, you know, all the troubles. And so you see, this energy of frustration and hate and so on, this would be dispelled and released as this fellowship, you see. You see that there is in that some close bond, but now it could become a different kind, right? And see, when people are engaged in this opposition of deep assumptions, there is a close bond between them, right? If they're indifferent to each other, it isn't there, you see, if they're politely avoiding the issue, right? So therefore it creates a possibility of, if you stay with it, of a certain change. This is very similar to what you've got to do in the individual problem, right? To stay with the difficult situation. It's not escape, but if you find yourself escaping, we have got to watch ourselves escaping and so on, you see. And you see, it's like the question of sorrow, you see, which Krishnamurti talks about a lot, that in this sorrow, there's a constant escape, a constant movement away from awareness of it, right? The reflexes move you away, trying to relieve it. And that means you could never find out what it is, right? What's going on. You could never perceive that. But see, if you see yourself moving away and stay with it, and staying with it builds up a great deal of energy. And you get a sense that it's all, the more you stay with it, the more you get a sense it's all really some sort of physical tension, right? And therefore you may get an insight that this whole thing is just a part of the material process. You see, now, the social problem is also a part of the material process, but we give it a very different significance. See, people don't think their problem between nations is part of the material process, but it's given really a transcendental significance, right? But actually, it's just the material process which has got muddled up. You see, it's in this smog situation. And now, that moment of insight in the group, seeing that we share this material process, and that material process we share is more significant than all the particular thoughts where we differ.
The sustaining of the dialogue within oneself increases the possibility of the dialogue with others, would you say?
Yes, because once you have an insight into that, sustaining the dialogue in yourself will help the others, or sustaining the dialogue with the others will help you, the individual, and help also communication outside the group. You know. And you see, the people could then, understanding this, try to establish dialogue groups and so on. You see, usually for such a dialogue group there should be a facilitator to help get it going and help to point out what's going on and so on, who gradually becomes less and less necessary. And the who might have the vision of dialogue, you see, which he could communicate. You see that. You see, it's important that this group have this meaning of see the meaning of dialogue and have this sort of vision of it to keep going and see, you know, to also and keep on developing that. You see, so they may talk about dialogue again from time to time. And then it would not be worthwhile to keep on asking, are we having a dialogue, you see? Although sometimes it's worthwhile.
I'd like to say something, I don't know if it's appropriate or not. This is my third year here. And the gentleman over here said a while ago that he didn't know why he was here. I have a feeling that I know why I'm here. It's like something tremendously important happening here. There's some action that I've never seen anywhere else in the world, never heard of. I've been in this country 10 years. And there's something very important that has a meaning, that has a value, that it has changed me in my life this past 2 years where I go back home and live, that my friends and people around me, it's affected them, what's kind of rubbed off. It's not because I've thought that it's a value that should be important, but it actually is. I don't know of anywhere else in the world or been exposed to anything that has the essence of the importance of what man is and the problem that's at the heart of what mankind is doing on Earth. And I don't know if that's pertinent or not, but I just want to say that it's not made up, but it's out of my heart, so to speak. And I think what you're doing here, you don't have to impress or tell me or necessarily what the meaning of dialogue is. It's actually a thing that's happened in me in the 2 years since I've been here. It's a living thing that's changed me. And it's probably one of the most important things that's ever happened in my life. It's just that it's ongoing in me by being touched by you. I've come close to you and your ideas and your knowledge, and it's burnt me. And I'm delighted over it.
You are a living example. It looks even in your present. In the process of the 3 years. Physically he changed also.
Well, we always said that, we've always been saying that the physical and this are not different.
Let's take a picture of you.
We all have to take before and after pictures.
Before and after.
Yeah. Well, I think now would be a good point to have a break. If we could please make it 15 minutes. I mean, I know it's not much you're saying, but... Well, now we've been discussing dialogue just to give that meaning and vision of dialogue, and tomorrow those who stay will try to begin something of a dialogue throughout the day. And but I think in the remaining time, we'd like to discuss a few other points, which we always consider. And you see, one of the points is this question of separation, that once we form the thought of separation, the image and imagination of separation, then we perceive as separate, and then we make it separate, right? As when we draw the line between the countries and perceive two countries and then create two countries. So we could say the bodies are individual, though they are capable of this close connection on another level, nevertheless, which we talked about through communication. The mind, in some way, the thought process, anyway, is a system. It's fundamentally collective, right? It would never not have it in its present form except through a culture and society. A language could only exist that way, and so on. Now, the individuality that we have, or we think we have, is to a large extent the product of our culture, which creates this particular image of the individual, but that all the people in a certain culture have the same image of their individuality, or more or less, you see. The question of it's clear that the question of thought determines the question of what is connected or separate, how you see it and so on. Now, if we go back to the personal consciousness, then there is that impression, that thought that there is an observer and an observed. There is a thinker. One of the basic, once we have formed the image of the self as me and I, there is the view that it is I who creates thought, right? As thought has explained its origin through that image. Is that clear? By attributing itself to that image, right? Just as you could attribute the sound of the telephone to the image in the television set and feel it to be there. So, therefore, the feeling could be created that there, somewhere in the back here, or here somewhere, is the source of thought, right? Or if you have a problem, you see, and you find that something is happening, you see, at first then you also have this division between the self and the world and so on in a similar way. Like you say, I end at my skin, but outside is the world, and you experience it that way, right? And in fact, that can be very variable. Like if you have a blind man who's holding a stick and he holds it tightly, he may feel he ends at the end of the stick, right? If he lets go, loosens his hold, then he ends at his fingertips. And he may, if he's part of a country, he may feel he ends at the boundary of his country. If somebody crosses the boundary, he's attacked, right? So on. Or you may feel you're one with the universe, or vice versa. You have the opposite sense of the thought which tries to go inward to the very essence, the core of the self, down to one point, right? Saying that point is me and the rest is being observed by me, right? But you see, it's all an image, right? It changes around according to the situation. That image may be more correct or less correct in various situations. Where the connection is close, it's maybe a correct representation. And where it's loose, it's not. See, so it would require seeing the coherence of that to see how it works, right, in each case. Now, see, let's say you have but we have this notion then that the agent, the thinker, creates the thought, and a person may identify himself with almost anything, but say Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, which meant his essential being was in the action of thinking, right? You see that he felt that action defined his being, right? And for many people they may feel that way now, from time to time. Now, but now the peculiar thing is we're suggesting that thought is a system belonging to the whole culture and society, revolving over history, and it creates that image of the individual who is supposed to be the source of thought, right? Is that clear? And it gives the sense of its being perceived and experienced and so on. And if anything is wrong with thought, then thought would say, that would be conducive to the next step, which is to say thought only tells you the way things are, and that individual inside decides what to do with it, right? He chooses. That was the picture which emerged gradually. That thought tells you what the way things are, and then thought chooses how to act from that information.
May I ask something?
What?
Does really thought tell you how the things are? I think thought disturbs it, distorts it. So only observation without the observer will tell you what really things are.
But I've said that...
The thinker thinks he is independent of thought. And then he can manipulate thought. And then he sees what he wants to see, and that's not what the things really are.
Yes, I said only that thought tells you the way things are. It doesn't say that they are the way it tells you, right? You see, it claims to say that this is the way things are, and to a certain extent it gives valuable information when it's working right. Now then, but thought says this is the way things are, and you, the thinker, must decide what to do. You see, but that's all misinformation, according to what we're saying, you see. Now, the same thing, you see, if you have a problem, let's say that if you have an image of yourself as good and something happens, your friend doesn't back up that image, and you feel hurt. You see, you feel that the image is removed and you're disturbed, and you may say, and after that moment of disturbance there arises the thought, what happened, right? And I'm hurt, and you see, instead of the pleasure which was in the image, the reflex is pain, and so on. And now you have, so that it becomes a problem, because what has happened is the thought has now separated itself in two and says, there is me who is hurt, and there is I, who am the observer looking at the hurt. Right?
It's a conflict.
Yes, it will create a conflict, because the minute you say that, then it's implied that the one who is looking will try to stop the hurt and will fight, you see. Now, on the other hand, that won't work, because we say actually there's nothing but a process of thought which creates the image of I and me. They are both the same ground, really, namely the thought, right? They're all one.
It's interesting, Dr. Bohm, that now it makes so clear that they, myself has been hurt, and I'm going to take a revenge. So the me has been hurt, now I'm going to take a revenge. It's like two separate things.
Well, usually what first happens is the me has been hurt, and I must get rid of the pain. You see, that's the first reaction, right? Saying, what can I do, right? So you start a train of thought, right? Saying, who did it? Who's to blame? And saying, okay, that's the blame. And I must take revenge. That may be one way out, or that person must apologize, or else I should not be hurt. You see, another reaction. And therefore there's a fight against, while the same thought which makes you be hurt also is fighting and saying, I should not be hurt. There's a conflict. You see, so you have these two situations, and there's two movements, right? And it's all one, really. And you see, there is that division which has been built up by this process of thought. And see, once we have a representation of the self as capable of being the observer and the observed, just as we say, I can look at my body, so we say, I, inside, can look at my inside and see that it's been hurt, right? You see, that analogy is drawn. But it doesn't work, you see. That because there is the process in which I look at my body has a certain meaning, but the process in which there is an observer who steps back to look at the hurt has no meaning, because it's just two images. It might as well be going on in a television screen, you see, right? And it's like the rainbow, which is really not there, but it's a process behind it, right? Rain and light. So there is a process behind all this, creating this sense of an observer who is supposed to do something, and then that apparently is perceived. So then thought comes along, takes that as a fact, as if it were a fact, and then proceeds to try to overcome that hurt. And whereas, you see, what would be needed really would be to stop that thought should stop. If that thought stopped, there would be no problem, you see. See, children, as I've often said, have that rhyme, sticks and stones could hurt my bones, but names can break my bones, but names could never hurt me. Now, and nevertheless, it's not true. You see, it may be true, but it doesn't work, right? That is, people still get hurt by names, right? So because of the thought which creates the image which produces either pleasure or hurt. Now, insofar as you have the image that could give pleasure, a fantasy that gives pleasure, that same fantasy turns around to give pain, right? When you get the opposite information into it. Is that clear? So you're very vulnerable once you depend on fantasy or image to give pleasure. You see, because that creates the sense of me, and then comes the division. When the pleasure doesn't work, comes the division and the struggle and the fight and conflict and so on. You see, if that division did not occur, there would be no conflict, right? Is that clear? There no real division occurs, but at least the appearance of division takes place in the image, right? Now, if there were no division, there would be no occasion for conflict. There would be a perception that this is thought. There would be proprioception of thought, saying thought is carrying out a train which produces pain, you see. And then thought would just stop because you don't want the pain. Right? But you see, there's all sorts of assumptions in there saying, I am too important to give up, right? And that, right? Saying, I can't allow myself to give up that pain, right? Is that clear? Is that assumption clear, a common one? People who are hurt have an assumption, I can't afford to allow myself to give up that pain, because then I would be sort of negating myself, right? Saying I have no importance. And saying that cannot be allowed. You see, that's absolutely necessary to maintain that importance. So, see, if you could sort of use, you see, if we had an insight right away into all that the observer is the observed, as Krishnamurti so often said, then that would all evaporate, right?
We don't not anymore have an insight.
What?
There's nobody having insight.
What if there were an insight?
The insight works in itself, and then something happens. And it is possible for everyone, because the same energy is in all of us.
Right. Yes, it certainly is possible, I think. You see, the point is that we have a resistance to it. We have the fact that there is confusion and that incoherence, and that we do not have this perception which sees what's going on. You see that there is this chemistry which reflex which keeps people going in the same way.
The chemistry is not the origin. The chemistry is affected by this resistance, this division.
Yes, the chemistry is affected by the division, and the division is sustained by the chemistry, because the body now demands relief. You see, the body being disturbed by the chemistry demands relief, and the first demand for relief is to see, if you had a pain in your arm, right? Suppose you hurt your arm, huh? You would say, I feel pain, right? There's a disturbance, and then the thought would come out and say, what's the cause of the disturbance, right? So you would sort of step back in your mind and look and say, okay, I see my arm has been hurt, I must do something. That would make sense, right? Because the thought and the arm are not really that closely connected. But when it comes to the internal pain, it doesn't seem to make sense. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. Somebody's asking.
Let's begin with the image of the self. Would there first be a body image that would be formed?
Well, the body image is always there in some sense. You see, we always sense our body, right?
So we're not talking of that. You're talking of a different image.
Yeah. Well, we form an image which you can't. It's very vague. It doesn't have to be well defined, right? Just it's me. If you say, you may point to yourself as being here or somewhere. And you feel somewhere inside is a point or a small region where you is the center.
So that image would be how we are defined by our parents, by the culture.
Yes, well, all that creates that image, right? And that now, therefore, all that content is attributed to the image, just as the bell is attributed to the telephone and the image. So we experience all that content as existing in the image, which, however, is perceived as real.
It appears that we exist in that image.
Yes, all our properties and qualities are in that image. That we feel that they're there, right? You see, if you're hurt, you will feel there really is something in here that's been hurt. People say, my heart has been broken, right? So, okay, now they feel something because in the region of the solar plexus there's a great disturbance, right? Clearly.
So as we continue to grow and we go to school and college and marry and whatever, we're adding to the image then.
Yes, but society is adding to it, saying you are this sort of person, you are that sort of, you should be, and so on. And you're at it, you're doing your bit, and then it all adds up to build up the image. You see, and that image then reacts, is made up of a set of reflexes which act, right? According to the image, you see, if the image is that I am great, then the action is I would like to hear people say that, right? I would try to, or else I would say it to myself or try to do something to prove it.
There's always going to be a sense of incompletion then.
It's always sense as incomplete, yes. Because, you know, it's only an image, it could never be complete. Right?
Could we talk about the image of our culture? I'm sort of interested in getting, we were going to talk about our culture, and have we talked about our culture?
Well, I was discussing the dialogue, you know, which would, perhaps I should have said, you see, that the dialogue would, I mean, get into this question of culture, because, you see, we would then begin to be able to share a meaning, right? And we would form a culture, a microculture in this small group, which might eventually be a nucleus of a greater one, right?
And our culture has its own self-image.
Yeah, well, it's full of self-images. They're all contradicting each other, just as we individually, our self-images contradict each other too, right? You see, so, and in fact, our individual self-images come from mostly the culture, don't they, you see? So, in fact, you see, the word idiosyncrasy, a Greek root meaning private mixture, according to my dictionary. And in other words, everybody, there's a big mixture of images floating around in the culture, and everybody picks his own mixture.
So they're not really two distinct things, the individual and the cultural image, they're really the same.
Yeah, they're all, each individual selects for one reason or another. He doesn't do it consciously. He picks up some of the images and repels some of the others, right? And he finds the others revolting and so on.
Even our sexual images are also, as a man, as a woman.
Oh yeah, that's all influenced heavily by the culture, yeah, very strongly. So it's all there, you see, and we form this image, and we have the image that I do the thinking, I am the thinker, but in fact the culture has produced most of the thinking, right? The thought, anyway. And therefore, it sort of passes through me, and I do add a bit to it, I do this or that to it, but the thought originates basically in the whole society and the culture, right? Now, the kind of thought we use, which is communicated anyway. And and we have that sense of separation because our culture tells us that each individual is separate, and we perceive it that way, therefore.
Well, it's very hard not to feel that, since we can move around and we're separate within our own skins. It's just a very difficult concept to transcend.
Well, yes, because the body actually has this independence, relative, but even then in the group it's possible for the group to become one body, as we said. And these football crowds, I see people really want that. In the football crowds, they are ready to risk life to have it. And see, so it's possible to have the body as individual or the body as a group. But when it comes to the mind, we have got so used to the notion so that the mind is individual that we don't notice the plain evidence, all the evidence from which you could infer that it's not. You see, so there is an element of individuality, but the individual body, insofar as there is insight into, let's say, the actual physical neurochemical process, as we were talking, that would be really closest to individuality. We could say that something of possibly cosmic origin operates directly in the body, right, when there is insight. So perhaps that is the closest we would get to true individuality. The word individual means undivided, literally, but we've seen that the individual that society puts together is highly divided, in conflict, right? So the question is not clear about what is individual, you see, and so on. You see, there's a great deal of incoherence in there, and and also the failure to see that some of these distinctions are just dotted lines leads to a wrong meaning, and leads to endless confusion. Now, See, that might raise the question of what kind of freedom is there, you see, for the person and so on. And you see, as long as we're in this system, there's very little freedom, right? Because the thing you want, you can say, I do what I want, but what you want is the result of the system, right? And we are wanting things which are incoherent and creating misery, right? You see, and we're not free to give that up.
We think we are free when we can do what we want.
And that's a mistake.
We are young. And we don't realize that the want itself prevents the freedom.
Yeah, well, the want comes from the conditioning.
Want is division, yeah?
See, so
image.
It's freedom, what you're talking about is freedom of choice. It isn't choiceless freedom.
yeah, you see, well, this freedom at that level is not very significant. Now, the point is, could freedom have a deeper meaning? And you see, I think this is connected with the question of necessity. That, you see, we may see necessity as external, as sort of it won't be turned aside, and we have to turn aside or it crushes us or something. You see that certain things are necessary, but we have our own internal necessity, which is otherwise when we have a struggle, right? Or else the thing is too powerful and you get crushed. Or you try to dominate and impose your own necessity, right? So that's the sort of pattern we take. And we think that when you're imposing your own necessity, it's freedom, but in fact we've seen it's still part of the same system, right? So the thing is that we have to get clear on necessity and contingency. Freedom would require some contingency in the sense that if there were not, things couldn't be otherwise, then there would be no freedom. But also some necessity, because if there were no necessity, whatever we did, our intentions would have no meaning, right? We might intend to do something, but if nothing holds with any necessity, then anything may happen no matter what we intend, right? So therefore, in some way both necessity and contingency are involved in freedom, right? Yeah.
I'm afraid I didn't understand what you just said about necessity and contingency.
Well, you see, necessity is what cannot be otherwise, right? And contingency is what can be. Now, it's because things can be otherwise that you are possibly free to do various things, right? Now, but if things were totally contingent, you would not have any freedom. You see, you wouldn't be able to count on anything. You might say, I want to do something, right? My intention is, but I can't count on the necessity of this table to remain a table, you see. So I'd say, I want to put the cup on the table, but meanwhile it may turn into a cloud of gas, right? Right? So therefore, freedom requires in some way, which we don't, hard to express, both necessity and contingency.
But contingency is not the same thing as choice, is it?
No, contingency really means it can be otherwise, right?
Whereas choice is something that's produced in the mind, an image or two images or whatever that the mind thinks that it has, correct? Is that
well, between those possibilities, you may choose, saying, I prefer this to that, you see.
But it doesn't. But it doesn't have. Does it have a base in reality, though? Is what I'm wondering. It doesn't seem that it's produced by the. It's just an image that's created by
but
the
you
mind.
see, you may have several alternatives which are correct. You see, saying there are several possible roads to go to a certain place, right? See, I come to a crossroads. There are several roads. One will take me here. One will take me there, right? Now, if I choose this road, I'll go here, and if I choose that road, I'll go there. But so, if I want to go there, I should choose this road, right?
That's all kind of a fiction in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
that. That actually, see, that sort of implies that there's something that chooses.
Oh yeah, well that's the language we use, right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying that whatever choice means, the thought process will say, could put it this way: if my intention is to go there, I must pick this road, right? The thought could tell you that correctly. If I want to go to Ventura, I must go on that road. If I want to go somewhere else, I must go on another road. The thought tells you that. These are the alternatives.
But to get where you're supposed to be, though, you can only take one turn, right? I mean, there's action in reality, and there's choice in the realm of images, right? Aren't they two different?
Yeah,
things?
well, yeah, but I'm saying the presentation of alternatives is a correct representation that thought could give. right? Now, but when you say you choose this alternative, it's not clear what it means, right?
Who chooses?
Who chooses or what chooses, or how it gets chosen, right? You see, so anyway, it doesn't seem, even if that were free, it wouldn't seem it was a very significant kind of freedom, you see. But the chances are, it does seem it's not even free, because your conditioning will, and if your choice is conditioned, then you're not free. Now, so I'm trying to say freedom may be something deeper. Now, see, the point is, we might usefully compare, see, think of an artist, a creative artist, or who is creating a work of art. Now, there are many possible contingencies, ways of putting his materials here, here, here. You see, very many, it's open, right? That's the field in which he can work. Right? And then, he must, however, from some perception, begin to develop how this is to be done by some sense of internal necessity. Otherwise, it won't hold together, it won't have any value, right? Any meaning. So, a creative perception of necessity. You see, in other words, freedom is the creative perception of a new order of necessity, right?
Yes, but oddly enough, that necessity isn't anything I have. It's more like, oh, I'm sitting in this chair, how interesting. I mean, it's not something I know or move from.
When really it's created, you see that, and that creation can also enter into science and create, and technology, and create all sorts of things, saying that in fact all the whole stuff that we've created here came about ultimately in that way, you see, at least. So therefore, see, freedom is the perception and creation of a new order of necessity. So we would say that therefore necessity is involved in freedom, but freedom is sort of first, right? In other words, you don't get free of necessity. See, one of our pictures is necessity is getting in your way for freedom, right? If it's necessary, if you're stuck by necessity, you're not free, right? You see, if you're bound by four walls, then you can't get out, right? That's one of the views we have, that necessity is external.
Does this make any sense?
Why?
See, in a sense, it seems to me all that one can ever be free to do is to be an innocent bystander. One can't really do anything other than that. You understand that?
Yeah, well, but I mean, in the sense that, but still, yes, but still you're deeply involved in this creative act, you see, right? You don't control the creative act, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's coming from the same source as this insight, right?
St. Augustine said, let go and let God.
Yes, well, from that, people saw this in this source, this unconditioned source as God. You see, the people may give it various names in various times. Somebody else had a question.
Well, yes, I'm kind of still playing with the contingency necessity continuum there. I wondered if maybe this would be an illustration that would make any sense. I was listening to a chamber music concert of some very new music, and it sounded as if the composer had chosen things with total contingency, I mean, complete randomness. But after listening for long enough, and I thought, well, I can either be bored out of my mind or listen and stay open to this and see if it makes any sense. That there began to be a certain inevitability about after this note, then oh yes, I can see that makes sense. And there, even though I couldn't conceptualize the pattern, there seemed to be some necessity coming through.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to say. That there was, if he was a genuine artist, there was a necessity behind it. But when he comes out with a new order of necessity, other people may not see it right away, right? And it looks just like contingency, and they say this is rubbish, right? So, in many cases it may be rubbish, but then occasionally it isn't, right? You see, so
necessity be felt by an impulse, an impetus.
Yeah, but that it's felt that way. But then also it can come. That feeling could come from the conditioning as well. You see, so see, Mozart was said to have, or even himself said, that he saw the whole composition all at once somehow, you know, the whole necessity of it, and then he sort of unfolded it. In other words, if that was the case, it was a kind of a gigantic flash of insight that created the whole thing, right? And you can't say where it comes from. So that would be a sign, the same as with any other insight, that, see, having been created, it affects the brain, and then the brain works it out, right? And how to play it, and so on. So so that suggests that there is a tremendous potential for creativity in this area, and that we could not only have necessity in art or in science, the creation of new orders of necessity, but maybe we should look at culture, society, and ourselves in the same way. To look at it as an art, you see, creative art, right? That the dialogue is potentially a creative art, right? Namely, that new orders of necessity will arise if we sustain this. And in fact, if anybody, I don't know how easily Mozart came to Mozart, but say to Beethoven, it was more of a struggle, right? But he had to sustain this work. And if we sustain this dialogue, then very seriously, then it becomes possible that there will be a creative new, in other words, that which appears to be just a lot of meaningless contingency is the field in which some new order of creative necessity might come, right? And out of that can come a new culture, a new society. This would be the microcosm, the germ, which might become the, which could then communicate, you see. Now, that is the kind of suggestion that this notion of artistic, scientific creativity should be extended into all these areas. Not just to say fragment and say it sticks to here and outside there we go with the old way. Right?
So this suggests that this necessity is nothing that I have, but rather I place myself at the disposal of necessity.
Yeah.
And as a dialogue group, the people come there, really they can't know what they're supposed to do.
No.
But in some sense they are available.
For that creative necessity arises between them, and in this movement between, you see, and the you see, as with Mozart, you know, in a way you could say he didn't do this thing. You see, it just happened to him, right?
Would the shared common meaning then be at the beginning, and would the meaning that is shared be the necessity?
Well, it concludes the necessity. The meaning is the necessity of dialogue to begin with, but when we get through all these barriers, which we've been talking about, you know, then maybe with the free flow of communication and with that sense of oneness, another order of necessity could arise, which was all together, you see. Do you see what I'm driving at there? It would be a kind of artistic creation, but it would have this rigor of scientific thought as well, right?
Would there ever be a need for no dialogue if once the new society took hold?
Well, I don't know. You see, I think people will have to watch. The dialogue might become natural, you see, in a sense like these early people who just got together and talked.
Yes. I guess what I'm really asking is if that pollution is undone within the system, would then the system operate without a need for dialogue?
Well, we wouldn't need formally dialogue. We would still need to talk, you see. And there's always pollution is liable to arise. But if we were very clear and sharp and rapid about it, it won't get very far.
Yes. But the longer it goes, I'm talking especially now for the moment about individual dialogue.
Yeah.
The more deconditioning that comes about, the less need for...
Well, we don't need dialogue as a way of repairing, but rather communication would take place as a creative act, like the art of communication, right? In other words, we wouldn't be getting together for the sake of overcoming or dealing with all the mess, primarily, but rather it would have another meaning. Right?
But in the beginning, probably, in the dialogue, there's going to be a lot of pollution.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm saying we have to go through that you see, because we've got it, you see.
So there you're suggesting that even if like was saying that we should just if there's the society that's creative, then we would just try to quickly meet any incoherence that come. But at the same time, now you're saying that let the pollution come out to begin with, and in that sense, that doesn't seem to be the aim of when we are starting dialogue. The aim doesn't seem to be to get rid of it immediately, rather than let it.
Yeah, let it come out, and we can't get rid of it any more than Mozart can sort of somehow force that thing to happen, right? That perception.
Actually, don't need to let it come out. It comes out by itself.
Right. But usually we stop it. You see, if it's coming out, then we either walk away.
But even then, we don't stop it either. It's the reflexes stop it too. You see that. But you see, thought is always saying, "I didn't do it." Right? You see, it says you did it. Right?
We put it in this way, for example, that in the process of dialogue, if people will start seeing the incongruency of thought, the incoherence, and realize there's a lot of defense of the image, and there's a lot of protection, and there's a lot of pretending, as that drops, people open themselves up for something different to come through.
Yes, well, the brain and the system opens up to something different, you see.
And it can unfold through each person in different ways.
Yes, and that different can be of something of creative significance, of even of cosmic significance, you see, and so on. Some possibly contact with something beyond just the culture and the society.
But it requires to move out of the incoherence.
Yeah.
And open.
Yeah, because all that incoherence muddles up the brain. It creates that smog. The brain is not able to work right. It's poisoned in some way. See, the brain is a material system, but it can respond. It's infinitely subtle. It can respond to all this creative whatever. You see that? You have to ask the question, if one brain such as Mozart could do this, it suggests that it should be a potential in general, you see. Something not exactly in music, but somewhere, you see, in some field. I mean, he may have had some unusual talent, structure, which was good for music, but still, that creative potential, which isn't restricted to any particular field, should be available to everybody, within whatever they can do, you see, and it would be more important that people see that. You see that now, and I think you see that the more civilization has developed, it has tended to focus on all these other things, and saying that creativity is primarily for the sake of the economy or for some other purpose like that, right? You see, or to provide entertainment or to or something like that.
A lot of our energy would be centered into something different than the incoherence.
Yeah. So that is the suggestion. So that there could arise a freedom which was the freedom collective as well as individual, right? You see, this is collectively we are not free at all as long as we're stuck with all this stuff. You see.
And a culture which wants to dominate its citizens will not encourage creativity.
No.
Because of course they don't want us to be creative.
No, the culture wants to defend itself. You see now, but we say all of that really looms very big, but actually it's a very small thing. It's something very insubstantial. You see, very ephemeral thoughts, which are circulating all over the society.
Well, you see how many cultures have collapsed in the history, and how many empires have collapsed. And maybe this is the time that collectively the cultures are collapsing, and the new culture, a new order is coming up, and maybe here is the macrocosm of what is happening.
Yes, well, it could be. You see, we don't know for sure, but you see, the point is that the new culture will arise first by our seeing this meaning of this whole situation, right? And seeing the value of it, and then the particular purposes as to what we have to do will emerge as we go along.
Yes.
Yeah. And one purpose after another. See, rather than starting with our purpose, which is fixed. Right?
I want to say something.
Yeah.
When we talk about division, that is really thought. Thought is division. And we divide energy. There's only one energy in the world. We say energy of love is different from energy of violence. And that is an illusion. It is not so. It's the same energy in love and in violence. Only in violence it is polluted, and by this division we create violence. If we condemn violence or create the opposite of non-violence, I was very puzzled and struck by Krishnamurti once saying that Gandhi was a violent man. That is an idea. The thought creates an image and a division. If there is no division, then this energy in violence really can be set free and it transforms.
Yes, that's true. Energy of violence or hate. You see, that is what we were saying, that the people in a situation of hate and violence are in a situation connecting them with a lot of energy, and this can transform into another kind, which is friendship and fellowship and love and so on. Now, but you see, that requires that we take this seriously and really sustain the work of communicating, you see, of dialogue. So if we're going to be able to do it together, you see, it's essential that we have to do this together, because as an individual it will have a limited meaning. Yes. And doing it together means, we're communicating, facing all these issues, all these, what happens, and persisting and sustaining the work even when it becomes difficult and unpleasant. Because we have to go through, you see, the fact is that we are violent, we have all that, right? Yes. And to imagine we don't have it will be meaningless, you see. So we have to say what we have it, we have to stay with it, we perceive it. And we have to perceive what the real meaning of it, which is that we are bound together by this physical thing which we call violence, right? See? Yeah?
In the beginning of what you've been saying today, it seems to me that there is only awareness, deeper consciousness, and the appearance is because it's incoherent, we see it differently and we see ourselves separate. But once we can go into it, that becomes coherent, and that awareness becomes extremely powerful.
Yeah. Yes, it's very powerful because it's all working together. Instead of being in different directions, it doesn't cancel out, but it works together.
Amazing.
Yeah. So right. So now, I think that you see, but one of the questions which is involved in all this is time. You see, as well as that, because one of the basic, I don't know, we would call it images or see, all thought involves time in a way which we don't see. You see that because we tend to think, that everything exists in time. That time is a certain reality. We draw a line. We represent time by space, right? In a diagram, we draw a line and call it time, and say, here is a point in time, which is now, and then another point, then another point. You see, and it's clearly thought as representing time, but we seem also to experience that time psychologically, right? You see, now in physics, time could be said, see, Leibniz, the philosopher, has said time is space is the order of coexistence. Those are all that coexist is in a certain order we call space. And time is the order of successive existence, right? The order of succession, right? When things succeed each other in a certain order, that is the basis of time, right? You see, so the real basis of time is succession, right? Now, time is a concept which is set up by thought to to represent succession. Yes. And there are all sorts of concepts of time are possible. And in the early days, people didn't think much about time. They may have a vague notion of past and future, you know, and the vague notion of tomorrow being any time, and the past was not remembered very well. There were no printed records. It was mythological mostly. The future was probably